Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Today on Oklahoma Gardening, Dee Nash shows us her potager garden. We learn more about how to avoid those pesky squash bugs. Dr. Charles Fontanier explains pre-emergence, and I've got a couple of clematis that I want to share with you, so stay tuned. Today I'm so excited that we are at the home of Dee Nash, who's a fellow friend and native Oklahoman. And if you are in the gardening world, you probably have heard Dee Nash because she is a popular writer, blogger, speaker, podcaster. I mean, you're doing it all.
Well, I try.
So you're always capturing everything about your garden. And I want to walk on in here and let's look at what you've got going right here with your vegetables, because this is just really an exquisite display, actually, I have to say.
Well, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about how you came up with this. I know a lot of people think, oh, I got to have a garden to have tomatoes, but
no, you can grow it in pots. You can totally grow tomatoes in pots. In fact, I think it's the best way to grow them. If you grow them in pots, large enough pots, with drip irrigation, something to tie them to, they do really, really well. They warm up faster in the spring. If we have torrential rains like we've had this year, you know, they do fine.
So we've got them on asphalt here, actually, too.
Yeah, we do.
I was asking you about this a minute ago, but you haven't seen any problems with
No, I did this last year, and I did it right up next to the kitchen garden. And so here we decided to do it down the middle of the garden so I could reach things in the kitchen garden. They did great last year. I grew peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, all in these pots. I think the secret is to have a big enough pot.
Okay.
Big enough surface area.
So these are kind of those woven fabric
These
pots.
are smart pots.
Smart pots.
This one is.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
made in Oklahoma.
And 20, 30 gallons or most of
Yeah,
yours?
this one's a 20-gallon, and then this bigger one back here is a 30-gallon. And yet you can see I have drip irrigation on all of them.
Yeah,
I think that's really important too, because if you don't have drip irrigation in your pots, it is really, really hard to grow things here.
Well, not only could this work for anybody in a home situation, and easy, you don't have to build much, you just get these and fill them with soil.
Right.
But school gardens, I mean, how many times do we see school gardens have just like asphalt areas or a playground or something?
Yeah, and people also grow on their driveways. That might be the only sunny place you have.
That's true.
You know, and they have to have at least 6 to 8 hours of sun, right?
Who says you have to put a car on a driveway, right?
Yeah.
Put your tomatoes
A
out
garden.
there.
A garden, always do the garden.
It looks fabulous, and you've got it well trellised up here. And I have to say, I mean, we're doing well in this season already with your tomatoes.
They're doing pretty good. I think they're taking off really well. I had the biggest harvest. Yeah, they did. I had the biggest harvest I've ever had last year, though.
Fantastic.
So that's an easy thing to do.
And that's what I would imagine. A little bit of that heat would also help get them established sooner as well.
Yes, and use good potting soil. And I actually listened to a podcast of a guy out in California who is a really good tomato guy. And so he said use 2/3 of the potting soil and 1/3 compost. And I think that's a really good combo.
That sort of helps inoculate that potting soil with some of that beneficial
with that good stuff. Yeah.
All right, well, let's take a look at what's right next to this is your potager garden. And just, I mean, a beautiful garden. I feel like I just walked into France all of a sudden here.
Well, I've tried to with the lavender for sure.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit. This has been in... I've been to your garden, but it's been quite a while, and I think this is fairly new.
It was brand new in 2009.
You've had this about a decade now?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about a potager garden, first of all.
So a potager is a very stylized garden. The word potager, if you speak it in French, that's how it sounded, but in England, they say potager, and it actually means potage, which is soup. Okay. It's a soup garden. I wanted a garden close to my kitchen, which is right over there. And I just wanted it to be filled with herbs and lots of vegetables. And then I ran out of room because I grew all this lavender, so that's why the tomatoes are in the pots. And it's set up for seating height.
Yeah.
You don't have to have beds this deep, but we did it because we wanted to sit on the edge. because I get tired of getting down on my knees.
Well, and also you need to take a break and enjoy your work sometimes, right?
Yeah, sometimes you do.
So your lavender is thriving right now. Tell us a little bit about some of the cultivars that you have in here. And you know, we had an epic freeze this year.
We did.
Are these all perennials that came back?
Yes,
or?
this all came back.
Wow.
This was planted new last year because it took me a while to border the whole thing because it's expensive. Lavender's high.
Right.
This is phenomenal, this variety.
Okay.
It does really well, and part of the reason I grow it, it's beautiful, it smells good, and I'm a beekeeper, so
Yeah, I was going to say, you got to be careful when you're touching your plants around here.
While they're blooming, for sure. And then I also grow several other varieties, and I did a big test on it and wrote a blog post on it. So Munstead is in here, Royal Velvet. There's several different varieties, all different sizes and types.
So what is your care on these? Are you going to cut these back?
Yes,
or?
as soon as those are finished blooming, I'm going to come in here with my battery-operated shears, and I'm going to shear them off because I want to keep that green. I don't want them to go to the shrubby woody stage. I made a mistake with that the first year, and they didn't overwinter as well.
Okay.
And I think the reason they do well in here is two things. These are concrete blocks, so it's very alkaline. And then on top of that, it's got great drainage.
Good drainage, yeah.
Those two things.
And
I do not put gravel in the hole or anything.
Yeah. So have you had much luck with lavender in ground anywhere?
No.
Or just raised beds?
Just raised beds.
Because of that Oklahoma clay, right?
Right, and that Oklahoma rain that we got all spring, right?
True,
yeah, because you just don't know what we're going to get.
Well, and I love your lovely water feature here. I mean, water is just such a cooling effect in a garden, even if you're not
even if we're
splashing
sweating.
in it.
Yeah. It is a cooling effect, and it has a nice sound. And I love it. And then this is not watered at all unless I just hit it with a sprayer. So I planted stuff that is really, really tough in here.
Well, it's a nice addition to the garden, and it really sets off that formal look. So a lot of people want that formal look, which creates that symmetry, but having a strong focal point
It does
important.
help. It really does. And I didn't think I wanted red. I actually thought I wanted blue, like you guys have at the garden at OSU. But then I got the bricks in, and they had a lot of red, and we built this out of 2 pots, and so we ended up with red.
And you go with what
you go with what you got.
Right, right.
So now that's kind of a feature of this bed. There's a lot of red in here, a lot of purple, and it all seems to go together pretty well.
Well, Dee, thank you for sharing your lovely potager garden, or
thank you.
Potager Garden, however you want to say it.
However you want to pronounce it.
I enjoy your garden here, and thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Today we are back down here at Lane, Oklahoma at the Wes Watkins Research and Extension Center. And joining us today is Dr. Jim Shrefler, who we're always excited to have on the show because you are just so knowledgeable about vegetables. You serve as the Southeast Horticulture Specialist down here for Extension, and we appreciate what you provide for us on the show. So I know you've been doing a lot of research with squash in particular. Tell us where you're at with that research.
Okay. Well, let me just quickly explain what this is all about. You know, over the years back when I started talking to farmers and home gardeners and farmers market growers, it seems like their main problem with squash and other cucurbits, pumpkins, was squash bugs. And they just didn't, the insecticides weren't working and this and that, and they tried all kinds of home remedies.
And I bet a lot of our viewers right now are dealing with that problem.
And one thing I saw that there was one thing that was recommended in some cases. They didn't give a lot of detail, but you could cover your squash plants with a netting of some sort to keep the insect pests off.
Right. So where are you at? Because this is a multi-year and multi-area. You're not just doing it here at Lane. You've been doing it elsewhere over the years.
Right. Right. We've worked with people in Stillwater, with people at Langston University, over several years doing some trials, looking at it, some different ideas on how this might be done. And I'm not going to explain all the background on that, but after several years of work, there are a couple things that came up as possible materials to use. Number one, that's one question. You know, what kind of material to use? Does it make a difference? And number two, if you're going to cover the squash, how do you decide when to remove those covers to allow the pollinators in? So
Okay.
So basically what we have here is a trial where we're comparing two different types of row cover materials. One is a horticulture fabric, what we see over here.
Like the spun material,
Yes,
yeah.
it's a spun material. And then this one is actually a fine netting, and the holes are small enough that squash bugs cannot get through them.
Okay.
Other insects could, but squash bugs can't.
Okay,
So
okay.
moisture can get through these. Again, they're going to block the rain, but moisture can get through them so they can breathe.
Okay.
But so that, and that of course would be very important.
Okay. So what are you finding between the two of those?
Well,
Anything?
we're, again, the reason this is kind of a wrap-up study to compare some things we saw. In both these materials look good. In some of the trials, we did see there was more powdery mildew on the squash that was under the cloth pipe material.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons to compare these two in this trial.
Okay.
So,
And also the timing of when to remove these covers. What are you finding
exactly,
with that?
yes. We, so one factor here is to keep the insect pests from getting to the squash. And what we're doing here, we're comparing two different removal timings. One is 2 weeks after after about half of the plants have the first female flower.
Okay.
And that's the little flower that has a little fruit at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start to see those, that's when you remove your cover. And then the second treatment is to remove, to wait another week, which is 3 weeks after first female flowers, and then remove the cover. So that would give you a chance if you wanted to extend your harvest period. And when you extend it, what that means is you're going to keep the insect pests off those plants for a little bit longer period,
Right.
and those plants will stay healthy and productive for a little bit longer.
But there is that possibility if you uncover, those squash bugs will quickly move over.
Oh yes,
so,
once
yeah.
you remove those covers, the squash bugs will show up pretty quickly.
So any
a lot of-
recommendations, 2 weeks to 3 weeks? Is that the...
Well, both work.
Uh-huh.
Both will work, and so the results of this trial, once we get the data, will help us better answer that. But in the previous trials, we saw that either with a 2 week or 3 week removal, that there was we had equivalent yields. We didn't have a real reduction. We looked at longer cover periods, up to 4 weeks and 5 weeks, and the yields dropped off greatly when we did that. So
Okay,
those
so
don't
that's
work.
too
but
long.
yeah.
So Dr. Shrefler, is there only one variety of squash that you've used here, or multiple varieties in
Yes,
this trial?
in these trials we used a single variety, and the variety is called Lioness, and we find it to be a pretty productive yellow summer squash. It would be good for farmers market and even for commercial producers.
Okay.
One of the reasons we chose it is because it has a good, what we call a virus disease package. It's supposed to be resistant to a lot of the viruses.
And are you finding that that's true?
Well, I mean, I think it is because we haven't in the other trials, haven't found a lot of virus problems, but we did have one start to show up here in this trial, and you can see right here these leaves that tend to be a little more strappy and pointy kind of thing. They apparently, again, I need to send some to the disease lab for them to verify that, but they appear to have some virus infection. And as that would be as compared to this plant right here that doesn't have too many of the symptoms, and you see the difference in the shape of these leaves.
Yeah, much broader.
Yes.
And
Now, as long as it may not be, it hasn't affected any of the fruit. Many times a virus infection will cause the fruit to be discolored and they misshapen and all that. We haven't seen that, so if that's the case, it's really not of any great concern. But
all right, excellent.
So,
Thank you for sharing this information with us, Dr.
my pleasure.
Shrefler.
We're here at the Turf Research Center to talk to you today about pre-emergence herbicide for your home lawn, particularly during the fall season. Now, if you look out at your lawn this time of year, you might be able to see a few weed species that are already established in the lawn, and odds are those are either perennial types or some sort of warm season annual weed. And at this time of the year, it's probably a little late to try to control those. So what we're really interested in are those weeds that are going to be germinating soon during the fall and into the early parts of winter. A pre-emergence herbicide is an effective option for several of these common winter weeds, and they are designed, these pre-emergence herbicides are designed to be applied, as the name would suggest, prior to emergence of those weeds. So this time of year in say late August into September is an ideal time to make those applications, and in hopes that we can keep our lawns weed free throughout the cooler months of the year. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you're dealing with a warm season lawn and we have no interest in overseeding with any kind of cool season species, then really we have a lot of options that can be used. However, if we have a tall fescue lawn or some other cool season species, this is also an ideal time to reseed or kind of overseed into those and improve those stands. And if you're planning to do that, then you're going to have to delay pre-emergence applications until after those new plants have emerged. So some of the more common weed species you might see emerging in the fall include annual bluegrass, henbit, Carolina geranium, and a list of many other broadleaves and a few grassy weeds that will readily germinate when the soil temperatures start to come down. And you'll have to look at specific products to determine if they'll be effective against that particular weed species. For our grassy weeds, most of our yellow herbicides are very effective. These include prodiamine and pendimethalin and a few others that are readily available at most retailers. A lot of our broadleaf weeds, if they're not controlled by these, you might look at another product called isoxaben. But as is always the case, read the label carefully and be sure to follow all of its instructions. Now, one point I want to be sure to clarify is a lot of these plant species can be controlled post-emergently as well, if that's a preferred approach. And in some cases, plant species like henbit do have an attractive flower, and you are not required to always control these if indeed you think it's an important attribute for your landscape. So a lot of the pre-emergent herbicide products that are on the market focused on the consumer are going to be in a granular formulation, although there are certainly sprayable liquid formulations out there. When making an application, whether it's a sprayable application or a granular application, there are a few steps you want to be sure to follow. The first one is to make sure you're applying it at the appropriate rate using a calibrated piece of equipment. The second is to make sure you're making a very uniform application. These products are intended to be applied in a broadcast manner across the entire lawn and create a protective barrier that prevents any of the weeds from germinating. And then the final step is to be sure to have either an irrigation system that can water in the product or maybe some timely rainfall that can activate it and get it into the soil where it'll be able to actually do its job. So when making an application with a granular product, you might use something like this broadcast rotary spreader pictured here. And as you're looking for the ideal product, you might see quite a few different options in your retailer. And so we've just brought a couple of them that we purchased locally, and what you might find is a product such as this that says weed preventer is going to have most likely a pre-emergence herbicide, but you always want to check for the active ingredient to verify that. One thing I also want to point out about this product is it says crabgrass preventer. Now, crabgrass is an annual grassy weed common for the warm season times of the year, but this product will still be effective for this fall application at controlling a lot of your grassy weeds and a few of your broadleaves. You might also find products such as this that have, in this case, 5 or maybe more different herbicides in it, and they might control a variety of weeds pre-emergently or post-emergently. And in this case, they may even have some fertilizer with it. And so you want to be careful and make sure that indeed the products that you're applying are meant to control the weeds that you're after. And then finally, I wanted to show another weed control product, but this one here doesn't control pre-emergently, it only controls post-emergently. And so a lot of our weeds that we'll see in this cool time of year are what we call annual broadleaf weeds. And a product such as this has several herbicides like 2,4-D, dicamba, and mecoprop, and they're very effective in a post-emerge application. but until those weeds emerge, this product will not be very effective. So if you're looking for a weed-free lawn throughout the fall and winter months of the year, pre-emergence herbicides might be a good option. If you're going to make that application, now's the time to do it. Late August and into September will give you 2 to 3 months of control. After that time, you might consider making a follow-up application, maybe somewhere around February. And that should help pick up, again, some of those cool season weeds that are germinating late, as well as prepare you for the summer and some of those warm season annual weeds. As a final note, I just want to remind everyone that only you can decide what's right for your lawn, and in some cases, you may not want to try to use a chemical application to control cool season weeds. Some of them can have very attractive flowers, and it's certainly up to you if you want to make that choice. For more information, you can check out the Oklahoma State website. We have a lawn calendar and a number of informationals about weed control in your lawn.
So often when we think about clematis, we think of these large vining plants that produce big flowers that sort of are like the starburst. And a lot of times those come in jewel tones. A lot of the clematis need to be supported in some way or they will ramble and kind of trail around. Now, a couple of years ago, I went up to a garden up north and there were 2 clematis that really captured my attention because of their unique appearance. This first one is Mrs. Robert Bryden. And you can see here, it doesn't look like your traditional clematis because it's got these small, dainty flowers. It's got recurved petals, as you can see as they pop back, exposing the sunburst or the starburst of stamens. Now, this particular clematis has a kind of an interesting history because it got its name because it was discovered by Miss Elizabeth Prentice's gardener, Robert Bryden, in the 1900s, early 1900s, and it first was made popular by the gardener Robert Bryden in the 1939 Horticulture magazine. While the actual lineage of this plant is a little unknown, we do know that it is a bush-type clematis. So it tends to have these large, more sturdier stems that really can support itself. Now, it's a little bit of a slow start, so we've had this one growing here just for a couple of years, and we let it kind of get established before we wanted to showcase it. And it's really just getting ready to pop into flower. So you can see it's going to be covered with all of these dainty, sort of soft blue flowers. The structure or the stems itself do really well to support themselves, getting about 6 to 8 feet tall. However, you can see we do have a trellis in there and they do appreciate a little bit of support, but for the most part, they're not like your traditional clematis that definitely need some support. So again, this is Mrs. Robert Bryden. It will, for the most part, die back to the ground, but that's okay because this clematis does bloom on new wood. Now across the way we have another bush type clematis. It is called Cassandra. It's only going to get 3 to 4 feet tall, so it's going to be a little bit smaller in stature and allow you to kind of fit it into more of a smaller garden setting. The nice thing about it is it also has kind of dainty flowers, but you'll notice that the petals on it are also recurved, but they're more of a hyacinth blue color. In addition to that hyacinth look, you're also getting a sweet fragrance that's going to fill the air. Now, both of these clematis, as I mentioned, are winter hardy. However, they are going to die back to the ground. And like all of our clematis, they tend to like their feet in the shade and their heads in the sun. So a nice layer of mulch is going to keep those roots a little bit cooler, allowing them to grow great in your garden. There are a lot of great horticulture activities this time of year. Be sure and consider some of these events in the weeks ahead.
Next week on Oklahoma Gardening, we take a look at some annuals that can't be beat by this heat. I'll have your September hort tips, and Barb is back in the kitchen washing up some produce. To find out more information about show topics as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussion on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and Tulsa Garden Club.